He gave up the life he was promised for the woman who taught him what love is. He had always been told what his life would look like. From the moment he could remember, there were rules, plans, and expectations laid out for him like a perfect map. His family, proud and respected in their community, had dreams for him that were as precise as clockwork. They had chosen the school he would attend, the friends he would keep, and even the path his career would follow. He was to take over the family business, marry someone from the right family, and live a life that people would admire from afar. On paper, it was a life anyone could envy. He had wealth, security, and opportunity. Yet, despite all of it, there was a quiet emptiness inside him that no privilege could fill. Each morning he followed the same routine. The alarm would ring, sharp and insistent, pulling him from sleep into a day of perfection. He would dress in crisp suits, the kind that always seemed to fit just right, and leave for work in a car that gleamed under the sunlight. Meetings, presentations, and appointments filled his hours. People respected him, sometimes even admired him, but there was no spark of excitement in his interactions. Everything felt carefully measured, as though life itself had been tamed and placed neatly into boxes, and he was expected to live within them. Still, beneath the surface he felt restless. There was a yearning he couldn't quite name, a whisper that maybe life was supposed to be more than expectations and appearances. The first time he saw her, it was by chance. He had gone to a small cafe on the edge of town, a place he had never noticed before, seeking a break from the unending schedules that seemed to govern his life. He had intended to sit quietly with his coffee and his thoughts, but the moment he entered, something shifted. She was there, sitting alone by the window, the sunlight catching in her hair and framing her face like a painting. She laughed at something on her phone, a laugh so free and genuine that it startled him. It was not the kind of laugh that sought attention or approval. It belonged to her alone. He felt drawn to it, as though it was a thread pulling at the part of him that had been silent for so long. He ordered his coffee, choosing a spot nearby but not too close, unsure of why he wanted to watch her. She noticed him eventually, offering a small smile that seemed to reach all the way to him. It was brief and casual, yet it lingered in his mind long after she had returned to her phone. He found himself returning to the cafe the next day, and the day after that, always hoping to see her again. Each visit was a mix of anticipation and nervousness, something he hadn't felt in years. He realized that for the first time he wasn't living by someone else's plan. He was living for a moment that felt entirely his own. The woman herself was unlike anyone he had ever met. She lived a life that was simple and unpretentious, yet rich in ways that money could never buy. She worked at a small bookstore, arranging shelves with care, recommending books to people who wandered in, and always treating them with warmth. Her world was grounded in the small joys, the smell of new pages, the sunlight through the windows, the quiet satisfaction of helping someone find exactly what they needed. He watched her interact with people, her patience and kindness shining through in every gesture. There was a sense of authenticity about her, a clarity that contrasted sharply with the polished, calculated life he had always known. He began to learn small things about her. She liked simple walks along the river at dusk, she had a soft spot for stray animals, and she believed that people should be judged by the goodness of their hearts, not the wealth they carried. Her opinions were firm but fair, and she did not care for the expectations society placed upon her. Conversations with her were easy and flowing. He found himself opening up in ways he never had with anyone else, sharing thoughts and fears he had buried beneath years of obligation and routine. Each interaction left him feeling lighter, as if the weight of his family's expectations was slowly lifting. Despite the comfort he felt around her, he also noticed the sharp contrast between their worlds. She had no interest in his wealth or social standing, and she questioned the values he had been raised to hold dear. At first he felt defensive, as though her questions were challenges to his identity. But gradually, he began to understand. Her perspective was refreshing, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable, forcing him to see his life from an angle he had never considered. He realized that what he had always been promised, status, security, admiration, was only a part of life. The part that truly mattered could not be bought or planned. It had to be felt and lived. There were moments when he doubted himself, The world he had been born into was not easy to walk away from. His family expected him to follow the path they had set, and they had invested so much in ensuring his success. Friends, too, assumed he would take the path of least resistance, marrying someone suitable, advancing in the business, and living a life that others could respect. To consider something different felt reckless, almost unthinkable. Yet each time he returned to her, he felt a quiet certainty that he could not ignore. His heart was choosing a path that his mind had never been allowed to imagine. One rainy afternoon, he found himself sitting across from her in the same cafe where he had first noticed her. The rain tapped lightly against the windows, creating a gentle rhythm that filled the silence between them. They talked about ordinary things at first, the weather, a book she had recommended, a new cafe in town, but the conversation gradually drifted into deeper territory. She asked him what he wanted from life, really wanted, beyond the expectations and plans laid out for him. He paused, struggling for an honest answer. He realized he did not know. All he knew was that he felt alive in her presence, more himself than he had ever been in all the years of following a pre-written script. It was in that moment that he began to understand something fundamental. Life was not a checklist of accomplishments or social milestones. Life was the moments that stirred the heart, the people who inspired growth, the courage to choose authenticity over obligation. She had taught him that without even trying. Her laughter, her kindness, her unshakable sense of self had opened his eyes to a reality he had long ignored. And in that quiet, rainy cafe, he realized that the life he had been promised was not the life he wanted, not if it meant giving up the chance to be with her, to learn from her, and to experience love in its truest form. As he left the cafe that day, rain soaking his coat, he felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He was standing on the edge of a choice that would change everything. To continue on the path set out for him would be safe and predictable, but it would also be empty. To step into the unknown, to prioritize this woman who had awakened something within him, would be uncertain, challenging, and perhaps even painful, but it would be real. And for the first time in his life, he knew that reality, with all its unpredictability and vulnerability, was exactly what he wanted. From that day on, he began to pay attention to the small signs in his life, the moments that made him feel alive, the decisions that resonated with his heart rather than his mind, the quiet voice urging him to choose authenticity. Each encounter with her deepened the sense that life could be more than obligations and appearances. He found himself thinking not about what he was expected to do, but about what he wanted to feel, what he wanted to give, and what he wanted to experience. And in those thoughts he discovered a freedom that had been missing all along, a freedom to love, to risk, and to truly live. By the end of that first chapter of their acquaintance, he had made no bold declarations, no promises, and no sudden decisions, but he had crossed an invisible threshold. He had begun to see that the life he was promised was not the only life possible. And he had begun to understand that the woman who laughed freely in the sunlight, who lived simply and fully, was teaching him something more valuable than wealth, more lasting than reputation, and more profound than any plan his family could make. She was teaching him what love truly is, and that realization was just the beginning. He could not stop thinking about her. Every detail, from the way her eyes lit up when she smiled to the small gestures that showed her kindness, replayed in his mind throughout the day. Work became background noise. Meetings and appointments no longer held the same importance they once had. He realized that no amount of wealth, recognition, or security could compare to the pull he felt toward her, a pull that was quiet but unrelenting. He had always been disciplined, precise, and controlled, but with her, he found himself letting go of that control, even just a little. And each time he saw her, each laugh shared, each glance exchanged, the invisible bond between them grew stronger. It was a sunny afternoon when he finally found the courage to spend more time with her outside the cafe. He suggested a walk along the riverside, somewhere quiet where they could talk without interruptions. She agreed, her smile both welcoming and teasing, as if she already knew he was nervous. As they walked side by side, the gentle sound of flowing water accompanied their conversation. She asked about his life, not in a probing way but with genuine curiosity. He answered cautiously at first, skimming over the details he had always lived by. But as the conversation unfolded, he felt compelled to share more, to let her see the life he had always been expected to lead. For the first time he spoke openly about his responsibilities, the expectations of his family, and the pressure to follow a predetermined path. She listened intently, never interrupting, but occasionally her eyes widened in surprise or concern. She asked simple questions, her voice soft but steady, and her words carried a weight that he had not expected. "Does it make you happy?" she asked. The question was simple, almost casual, but it struck him deeply. Happiness was not something he had considered for himself. His entire life had been structured around success, duty, and approval. But now, in her presence, he realized that those things had never truly mattered to him. Her perspective began to change the way he viewed his life. She spoke of choices and freedom, of living honestly and fully, and of the small joys that made life worth living. She told him about her own struggles and dreams, about times when she had felt alone or uncertain, and how she had learned to rely on her own strength and heart. Listening to her, he felt a mixture of admiration and longing. Here was someone who had chosen to live on her own terms, to embrace vulnerability without fear, and to find joy in simplicity. And he wanted that. He wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything in his life. As days turned into weeks, their connection deepened. He found himself visiting the cafe more often, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by chance, just to see her. They shared conversations about books, music, and the small events of daily life. But gradually, their talks became more personal, touching on fears, regrets, and hopes for the future. He felt understood in a way he had never experienced before. She never judged him, never criticized, but instead encouraged him to see life from a different perspective, to question what truly mattered, and to follow the voice of his heart. Despite the joy he felt with her, he also began to notice the conflicts that arose from their different worlds. She had little interest in his wealth or social status, and she often questioned the values he had been raised to uphold. At first he felt defensive, as though her questions challenged his identity and his choices. But over time he began to see her perspective not as a threat, but as a mirror, reflecting the parts of his life he had ignored or suppressed. He realized that the life he had been promised was not inherently wrong. It was just not his own. It belonged to others, to expectations set long before he had the chance to define himself. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink by the setting sun, he felt a surge of emotion he could no longer contain. He wanted to tell her how much she meant to him, how much she had changed him, and how he could no longer imagine his life without her. But words felt inadequate. Instead, he reached for her hand, tentatively at first, then more confidently as she interlaced her fingers with his. She looked at him, surprised but smiling, and in that silent moment, they both understood that something profound had begun. The intensity of his feelings brought both excitement and fear. He knew that choosing her, truly choosing her, would mean stepping away from the life that had been planned for him. But he would have to let go of security, predictability, and the approval of his family and society. He would have to face judgment, doubt, and the unknown. And yet, with every beat of his heart, he knew it was worth it. For the first time, he felt alive in a way he could not explain, a sense of purpose that came not from duty, but from love. As their bond grew, he began to see the world differently. The small moments with her, the shared laughter, the gentle conversations, the quiet gestures of care, made everything else fade into the background. Work, social obligations, and status became less important. He started to question why he had accepted a life that did not feel like his own. He realized that he had spent years following a script written by others, neglecting his own desires and emotions. And now, standing at the edge of this new possibility, he felt both terrified and exhilarated. There were moments of doubt, of course. He worried about what his family would think, about how his friends would react, and about the practical consequences of changing his life. He wondered if he was being foolish, if he was risking too much for something uncertain. But each time he saw her, each time she smiled, each time she laughed or shared a thought, those doubts faded. Her presence reminded him of the value of authenticity, of living fully, and of trusting the heart even when the path is unclear. He began to make small changes in his life, testing the waters of freedom and choice. He spent less time worrying about appearances, more time listening to his own feelings, and more time with her. They explored the city together, finding hidden parks, quiet streets, and small cafes where no one knew them. They shared meals, stories, and dreams, learning more about each other with every encounter. He discovered that love was not only about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was in the quiet support, the small acts of kindness, and the understanding that grew over time. Through these moments, he began to understand something essential. Love was not about possession, control, or expectation. It was about connection, respect, and the courage to be vulnerable. She had shown him that love could be gentle, steady, and life-changing without being loud or dramatic. She had taught him that true love required honesty, patience, and the willingness to let go of old patterns and expectations. And he knew that to embrace this love fully, he would need to choose her over the life that had been promised to him, a life that no longer felt real or meaningful. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river, she turned to him and said something that struck him deeply. "Life is too short to live for what the others expect," she said. "You have to live for what makes you feel alive." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that he could not ignore. He realized she was right. For years he had been living in the shadow of expectations, following a path that was not his own. But now, with her, he saw a future that was both uncertain and full of possibility, a future that he could claim for himself. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the water, he felt a sense of clarity he had never experienced before. He understood that the choice he faced was not easy, but it was necessary. To continue on the path laid out for him would mean sacrificing his chance at real happiness, real connection, and real love. To step into the unknown with her would mean embracing vulnerability, uncertainty, and the potential for both joy and hardship. Yet, with her hand in his, he felt a strength he had never known. He felt ready to face whatever challenges might come. That evening, as they walked back toward the city lights, he realized that life was no longer about what he was promised. It was about the choices he made, the risks he took, and the love he allowed himself to feel. She had shown him a world beyond obligation and expectation, a world where authenticity and emotion mattered more than prestige or wealth. And he knew, in the deepest part of his heart, that he could not turn back. The life he had been promised would always exist, but it was no longer his. His life now belonged to the possibilities that she had opened before him, a life of love, connection, and the courage to truly live. He woke up that morning with a strange mixture of excitement and unease. The feeling in his chest was unmistakable. It was love, deep and real, yet accompanied by a fear he had never experienced before. He had spent his life following the path that was laid out for him, always certain of what came next, always confident in the choices others had made for him. But now, the certainty was gone. Love had entered his life like a force of nature, unpredictable and powerful, and it demanded something of him he had never been asked to give: courage to be himself. Courage to choose a path that no one else could understand. Courage to leave behind everything he had been promised for a chance at something genuine. He remembered the first time he had held her hand, the quiet warmth of her touch, the unspoken connection that passed between them. That small gesture had changed everything. It was not dramatic, it was not announced to the world, but it was enough to make him realize that the life he had been living was incomplete. He began to see every detail differently: the way the sunlight fell through his window, the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of people laughing on the streets. All of it seemed sharper, brighter, more meaningful. Life, he understood now, was not about what others expected of him. It was about what made his heart feel alive. He wanted to see her again, to spend every possible moment in her presence, but the thought of leaving the predictable world he knew filled him with doubt. The family he had been born into had plans, expectations, and dreams for him, and they would not understand his choice. Friends who had once admired him for following the right path might judge him. Even he himself had moments of uncertainty. Was it selfish to prioritize his feelings over the life he had been promised? Was he abandoning responsibility for something fragile, something uncertain? Yet every time he thought of her, every time he remembered the way she smiled or laughed or simply existed, the doubts melted away. The choice became clearer. He could not go back to a life of empty perfection. He had to follow this new path, no matter how uncertain it might be. That afternoon he decided to take her on a small adventure. Not anything grand or expensive. He wanted something simple, something that would show her that he valued her for who she was, not the life he had been given. They walked through narrow streets lined with trees, stopping to admire small shops, talking and laughing, sharing stories that had never been told before. She spoke of her childhood, her dreams, and the small victories and failures that had shaped her. He listened with rapt attention, fascinated by the strength she had built in a life so different from his own. Her resilience, her honesty, and her ability to find joy in small moments inspired him in ways he could not fully articulate. As they walked, they came across a small park with a fountain in the center. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing across the open space. He suggested they sit for a while, and they found a quiet bench under the shade of a large tree. For a moment neither spoke, simply enjoying the presence of the other. He observed her as she watched the children play, a soft smile on her lips, her eyes reflecting a calm confidence that he found both comforting and magnetic. It was in that moment that he realized how much he wanted to protect her, to be there for her, and to share his life in a way he had never imagined sharing anything before. But reality intruded like a cold wind. He remembered the life he had been promised, the meetings he had to attend, the plans laid out by his family, the obligations that awaited him. For a moment, fear gripped him. Could he truly abandon everything he had known, everything he had been trained to achieve for a chance at love? The weight of responsibility pressed on him, but then he looked at her again, and the doubts began to fade. In her presence, life felt fuller, brighter, more meaningful than anything he had ever known. He realized that the choice was not between love and responsibility. It was between a life of emptiness and a life of truth. And he could no longer choose emptiness. As the days passed, he began to take more deliberate steps. He spent less time worrying about appearances, less time attending to expectations that no longer mattered, and more time with her. He learned the rhythms of her life, the small rituals that made her happy, the moments that brought her joy, and he began to integrate them into his own world. They cooked meals together, walked through quiet streets in the evening, and sometimes simply sat together in silence, enjoying the comfort of shared presence. These moments, small and unremarkable to an outsider, became his lifeline, grounding him in a reality that was authentic and meaningful. The woman in turn noticed the changes in him. She saw the way he laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and allowed himself to feel without restraint. She admired his strength, his dedication, and the depth of emotion that he had kept hidden for so long. Yet she also challenged him, gently but firmly, encouraging him to face the fears that held him back. She asked questions about his choices, his desires, and his vision for the future, not to judge but to help him understand himself. Through her guidance and patience, he began to see that love was not just a feeling. It was an action, a commitment, and a willingness to grow. Alongside another person, their bond deepened with every shared experience, every quiet conversation, every laugh and moment of vulnerability. He began to realize that love required courage, not just emotion. It required the willingness to face uncertainty, to risk disappointment, and to prioritize connection over comfort. And with her, he felt capable of that courage in a way he never had before. The walls he had built around himself, walls of duty, expectation, and fear, began to crumble, replaced by a desire to embrace life fully, with all its imperfections and challenges. However, their growing closeness did not come without conflict. Occasionally, the pressure of his previous life returned, whispering doubts into his mind. Family expectations, societal norms, and long-standing habits pulled at him, reminding him of the security and predictability he would be giving up. He felt moments of guilt and hesitation, questioning whether he was making a mistake. But every time he looked at her, every time he felt her warmth and authenticity, those fears dissolved. He understood that true happiness required risk, and that love was worth any sacrifice. One evening they attended a small local fair, wandering among colorful stalls and watching children play games. The air was filled with the scent of fresh food and the sounds of laughter and music. They shared cotton candy and played small games, laughing together as they tried to win little prizes. In that joyful chaos he felt a sense of freedom he had never known. It was not the freedom of wealth or status. It was the freedom of being fully himself, unrestrained and unafraid. He realized that he did not need the life he had been promised. He needed this life with her by his side, experiencing everything with openness and love. Later, as they sat on a hill overlooking the fair, watching the lights twinkle and fade, he turned to her and spoke with a sincerity that surprised even him. He told her how much she meant to him, how much she had changed his life, and how he could no longer imagine a future without her. She listened, her eyes reflecting the depth of her own feelings. And when he finished, she reached out and took his hand. In that simple gesture they acknowledged a truth that words alone could not convey, that their lives had intertwined in a way that was both profound and irreversible. From that moment he began to take even more conscious steps toward a new life. He started to let go of the trappings of expectation, the carefully planned career, the obligations that no longer served him, and the approval of those who could not understand his choice. Instead, he focused on what truly mattered, the shared moments, the growing love, and the courage to build a life that was authentic and meaningful. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to deepen their connection and strengthen their commitment. Through their growing relationship, he learned lessons he had never anticipated. He discovered patience, understanding, and the importance of listening. He realized that love required more than passion. It required empathy, compromise, and a willingness to see the world through another person's eyes. She taught him that happiness was not a destination, but a journey, and that the choices made with honesty and heart were far more valuable than any measure of success imposed by others. By the end of the third part of their story, he had changed in ways that were both visible and subtle. Friends noticed the lightness in his step, the openness in his conversation, and the genuine warmth in his smile. Family may not have understood his choices, but he no longer sought their approval. He had begun to understand that the life he had been promised was not truly his to live. His path now belonged to him, guided by love, courage, and the desire to be fully present in every moment with the woman who had awakened his heart. The days that followed were filled with excitement, laughter, and discovery, but also with the weight of decisions he could no longer avoid. Choosing love had given him freedom, yes, but freedom came with its own trials. He could no longer rely on the predictable structure of the life that had been promised to him, and for the first time he was completely responsible for the direction of his own life. Each morning brought a choice: to continue following the path laid out by duty and expectation, or to fully embrace the uncertain but deeply meaningful life he now shared with her. He noticed the subtle reactions of people around him. Friends who had once admired his disciplined life now looked puzzled when he declined invitations to exclusive gatherings or refused career opportunities that would have increased his status. Some colleagues whispered about his decisions, questioning why he had begun to step away from the path of predictable success. Even his family, initially proud of him for following their guidance, now expressed concern, confusion, or disappointment. At first their words stung. He felt guilt creep in, a quiet reminder of the life he had been expected to live. But every time he looked at her, every time he felt the warmth of her hand or the sincerity in her smile, he knew he could not turn back. The woman noticed his inner struggle and met it with patience. She never pushed him or criticized his past. Instead, she reminded him gently of the power of choice and the importance of living a life true to oneself. She would say, "It's not wrong to follow your heart, even if it scares you. Courage is choosing what feels right, not what feels easy." Her words became a guiding light for him. They were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth, and slowly he began to trust himself more. He realized that living authentically required sacrifice, but it also required a willingness to embrace the uncertainty of life with openness and love. Together, they faced the first major challenge. A family gathering had been scheduled, one that carried the expectation that he would attend in full compliance with the traditions and appearances his family valued. They expected him to celebrate achievements he no longer prioritized, to smile and nod at conversations that felt empty, and to reassure relatives of a path he no longer intended to follow. He had tried to prepare himself to steel his mind against the pressure, but when the evening arrived he felt the familiar weight of obligation pressing down. He looked at her across the room, calm, composed, and patient, and he drew strength from her presence. When his parents subtly asked about his choices, about his career, his plans, and the life he seemed to be leaving behind, he felt a twinge of fear. The words to defend his decisions did not come easily. He was torn between respect for his family and the truth of his heart. But then he saw the encouraging look she gave him, a small nod that said he could be honest without shame. He spoke carefully but firmly, explaining that he had discovered a path that felt genuine, that he was pursuing love and authenticity over status or expectation. There was a pause, a tense silence that seemed to stretch for hours, and then he noticed a soft, almost reluctant smile on one of his father's faces. While not fully approving, they began to accept that he was choosing his own life, even if it was not what they had envisioned. Outside the family expectations, daily life presented its own set of challenges. Money was no longer guaranteed, stability was no longer certain, and every decision he made now had consequences that fell entirely on him. There were moments when he wondered if he had made a mistake, when doubts whispered that perhaps love alone could not sustain a life against practical realities. But every time he faced such moments, she was there, steady, supportive, and patient. She showed him that love was not a distraction from responsibility, but a force that could give him courage, focus, and resilience. They found joy in small victories. Together they fixed a leaky faucet in her apartment, cooked a meal from scratch, and shared long walks through the city at dusk. Each moment, no matter how simple, became a building block of their new life. They laughed when they failed at small tasks, celebrated when they succeeded, and learned to appreciate the unpredictability of life. In these experiences, he discovered that love was not always about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about being present, sharing the ordinary, and growing together through the challenges life presented. Even with these positive moments, conflict was inevitable. There were arguments, minor misunderstandings, and moments of insecurity. Sometimes he worried that he was not doing enough, that he was failing to balance the responsibilities he had left behind with the new life he was building. At other times, she feared that he might retreat to the life he had once known, believing it safer and easier than the life they were now creating together. But each disagreement was followed by understanding, patience, and honest conversation. They discovered that love required not just affection, but communication, empathy, and compromise. And each time they overcame a challenge together, their bond grew stronger. One of the most testing moments came when a career opportunity arose that could have restored much of the stability he had given up. It was a lucrative position, one that promised prestige, security, and recognition. Friends and family urged him to consider it, reminding him of all he had sacrificed. For a moment he felt torn. Could he pursue this opportunity and still maintain the life he was building with her? Could he reconcile the world he had left behind with the life he wanted to create? He spent the night awake, thinking, analyzing, and weighing his options. In the early hours of morning he looked at her sleeping peacefully beside him, her face calm and serene in the soft light. In that quiet moment, he understood the truth that had been growing inside him for months. Love, authenticity, and connection were more valuable than any measure of status or wealth. The life he had been promised was not truly his. The life he was choosing now, uncertain though it may be, was his to live fully and passionately. With that clarity, he made the decision to decline the opportunity, to fully commit to the path they were building together, and to embrace the challenges that came with it. They celebrated this decision in small, meaningful ways. They spent a weekend exploring the countryside, laughing as they wandered along trails, discovering hidden streams, and sharing stories under the open sky. They cooked meals together over a small fire, sang softly to each other as the stars appeared, and held each other close as the night grew cold. In these moments, the reality of their choice of leaving behind the predictable life for a love that was real, felt like a gift rather than a sacrifice. Through these experiences, he learned the true value of sacrifice. He realized that leaving behind comfort, approval, and security was not a loss, but a gain, because it allowed him to embrace something infinitely more meaningful. Love, he discovered, required courage, patience, and trust, not just in the other person, but in oneself. He learned to face fear without retreat, to speak truth without hesitation, and to prioritize the heart over expectation. And in the warmth of her presence he found a resilience he had never known before. By the end of this period, the man had transformed in ways both visible and subtle. He walked with a lighter step, laughed more freely, and spoke with a confidence that came not from status, but from authenticity. The woman, for her part, admired his growth, recognizing the effort and courage it took for him to step fully into this new life. Together they had faced doubt, external pressure, and the uncertainties of change, and they had emerged stronger, united by a bond that was tested and proven. Even as challenges continued to arise, financial concerns, societal judgment, and the lingering expectations of his past, he had learned that life was not about avoiding difficulty, but about meeting it with honesty, love, and courage. He had discovered that the life he had been promised was not a life at all if it meant giving up the chance to love fully and live authentically. And in that understanding he felt a deep peace, a sense that he was finally living his own story, on his own terms, with the woman who had taught him the most important lesson of all, what love truly is. The fourth chapter of their journey ended not with grand declarations or dramatic changes, but with quiet confidence and growing trust. They knew there would be more obstacles ahead, more moments of doubt and difficulty, but they also knew that their bond had grown strong enough to face them. Together, they had learned that love was not only an emotion, but a choice, a daily decision to care, to understand, and to prioritize connection above convenience. And with that knowledge they stepped forward, hand in hand, ready to continue the life they had chosen together, fully aware that the best moments were still ahead. The morning light fell softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room where they sat together. For the first time in his life he felt fully at peace, not because life was predictable or free of challenges, but because he was living it on his own terms, guided by love and the connection they had built over the months. He looked at her and saw more than the woman who had awakened his heart. He saw a partner, a teacher, and a mirror, reflecting the best parts of himself he had never dared to explore. Their days had become filled with purpose, not the purpose dictated by duty or expectation, but the purpose they created together. They planned small adventures, helped each other through difficulties, and celebrated the quiet joys of everyday life. Each morning they would greet the day with gratitude, aware that their life together was not a matter of chance, but of conscious choice. He had learned that happiness was not something to be earned through achievement or recognition. It was something to be nurtured, cherished, and shared. He remembered the years before he met her, when life felt like a carefully constructed plan that left no room for error or emotion. Now, the contrast was striking. The unpredictability of their days, the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them, and the ability to embrace both triumph and disappointment had given his life a richness he had never imagined. Even the challenges they faced were no longer burdens, but opportunities to grow, to strengthen their bond, and to discover new depths of patience and understanding. One day, they decided to revisit the riverside where they had first walked together. The familiar path brought memories of their earliest conversations, tentative glances, and moments of shared laughter. They sat on a bench overlooking the water, and he realized how far they had come. He had learned to let go of fear, to trust in love, and to embrace a life that was authentic rather than prescribed. She had shown him that real strength came not from control or power, but from vulnerability, honesty, and the willingness to open one's heart fully. As they watched the river flow, he turned to her and spoke softly. "Do you remember the first time we walked here?" he asked. She nodded, smiling. "I was so unsure of everything," he continued. "I had a life that I was supposed to live, but it never felt like mine. And then you came, and everything changed. You taught me what love really is, and you taught me how to live for myself, not for anyone else. She reached out and held his hand, her eyes reflecting the depth of emotion she felt. "And you taught me the same," she said. "You taught me that love is not just a feeling. It's choosing each other every day, even when life is hard." Their relationship had become a partnership in the truest sense. They supported each other through challenges, encouraged each other's growth, and celebrated each other's successes. They had learned to navigate disagreements with patience and respect, to listen deeply, and to respond with understanding rather than judgment. The love between them was no longer a fragile spark but a steady flame, one that had been strengthened by trials and nurtured by mutual care. The man began to reflect on the life he had left behind. He remembered the lavish gatherings, the structured routines, and the constant pressure to conform. At the time, those things had seemed important, even necessary, but now they felt distant, hollow, and irrelevant. He understood that his previous life had been about appearances and expectations, while the life he now shared with her was about authenticity and fulfillment. He felt a profound gratitude for having discovered this truth, for having the courage to choose love over obligation. In their new life, they also embraced the simple pleasures that had been missing from his previous existence. They cooked meals together, taking joy in each step of preparation and the shared laughter that often accompanied minor mistakes. They explored new parts of the city, walked through parks, and sat quietly on benches watching the world go by. Sometimes they simply stayed at home, reading side by side or sharing stories from their pasts. Each ordinary moment became extraordinary because it was shared with someone they truly cared for and trusted. Even external pressures could no longer shake him. While friends and family still had opinions about his choices, he had learned to listen without being swayed. He understood that his happiness, his fulfillment, and his love for her were not negotiable. They were the foundation of the life he had chosen, a life that could not be measured by wealth, status, or approval. He had discovered that living authentically required courage, but it also brought a sense of peace and satisfaction that no external measure could provide. One evening, as they prepared a small dinner together, she looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. He paused, considering the question. "No," he said finally with conviction. "There were moments of doubt, yes, but I have never regretted choosing this life with you. You have shown me the meaning of love, the courage to be myself, and the joy of living fully. Everything I gave up was worth it because I gained something far greater than I could have imagined." She smiled and squeezed his hand, and in that moment they shared a silent acknowledgement of the depth of their bond. Their love had also inspired personal growth. He became more compassionate, more patient, and more attuned to the needs and feelings of others. He learned to celebrate small victories, to be grateful for each day, and to face challenges with resilience and optimism. She, too, grew alongside him, discovering the strength that comes from being supported and loved unconditionally. Together, they built a life that was rich not in material wealth, but in experiences, understanding, and the warmth of shared affection. As the months passed, they began to talk about the future in a way they had never dared to before. They spoke of dreams, of possibilities, and of the life they wanted to create together. They imagined a home filled with laughter, a space where they could nurture each other's growth, and a life that was guided by love and authenticity rather than expectation. The thought of the future no longer felt intimidating. It felt exciting, full of potential, and grounded in the certainty of their bond. He often reflected on the lessons he had learned along the way. He realized that love was not something to be taken lightly, nor was it something that could be planned or predicted. True love required trust, patience, understanding, and a willingness to embrace vulnerability. It demanded courage to step away from the familiar, to face uncertainty, and to prioritize connection over comfort. Through her, he had discovered the power of these truths, and through their shared journey, he had learned to embody them in his daily life. One quiet afternoon, they walked along a path lined with trees, the leaves turning gold and red in the early autumn. They held hands, walking in comfortable silence, each step a reminder of the life they had chosen together. He thought back to the days when life had been dictated by expectations and plans made by others. He marveled at how far he had come, at the courage it had taken to step away from a world of certainty, and at the beauty of the life he had built alongside her. He realized that every challenge, every moment of doubt, and every decision to stay true to his heart had been worth it. As they paused to watch the sunset, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the love that had transformed his life, for the courage that had allowed him to step into the unknown, and for the woman who had taught him what love truly is. She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. In that embrace, there was no fear, no doubt, and no expectation, only the quiet certainty of shared love and the knowledge that together they could face anything. The man understood now that life was not about following a script written by others or achieving milestones set by society. Life was about connection, love, courage, and authenticity. It was about making choices that align with the heart, even when they are difficult or unconventional. And most importantly, it was about embracing the journey, with all its joys, struggles, and surprises, alongside the person who makes it meaningful. As night fell and stars began to twinkle in the sky, they returned home, walking hand in hand through the quiet streets. The city lights reflected in their eyes, and they spoke softly of their hopes, their dreams, and the small things that made life beautiful. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer felt frightening. He had chosen a life that was true to himself, guided by love, and grounded in the lessons she had taught him. And in that life he had found not only happiness but a sense of purpose, belonging, and fulfillment that he had never known before. He knew that the journey was ongoing, that challenges would continue to arise, and that life would always demand courage and commitment. But he also knew that the foundation they had built together was strong. Their love had been tested, nurtured, and proven resilient. He had given up the life he had been promised, but in doing so he had gained something infinitely greater. A life full of meaning, connection, and the enduring presence of the woman who had shown him what love really is. In the quiet moments before sleep, he reflected on the transformation that had taken place. The man who had once been defined by expectations and plans was no longer bound by them. He was free, not in the absence of responsibility, but in the presence of love, authenticity, and choice. He had learned that true freedom comes from living a life aligned with the heart, and that true love is both a teacher and a companion, guiding us through uncertainty, growth, and joy. And as he drifted to sleep with her beside him, he felt an unshakable certainty. The life he had chosen, though uncertain and unconventional, was the only life worth living. The life he had chosen was real, full, and deeply meaningful. And most of all, it was shared with the woman who had taught him the greatest lesson of all, that love is not just a feeling, but a choice, a journey, and the greatest gift life can offer.